Hi, welcome to another episode of Unfiltered Tea Time brought to you by Little Dagger Aesthetics. This is one of the episodes that I've been kind of looking forward to in a very weird way. We are going to be talking about mental health, and this time, instead of just being really general stuff, it is specifically stories about mental health. So I have three others with me here today to talk about their experiences and answer my questions and get a little personal. I do want to put a little trigger/content warning for this episode in general because we are talking about mental health. It can be a bit of a heavy subject, and you might be hearing some stuff about self-harm, self-esteem, suicidal tendencies, thoughts, all the latter. So do beware and don't feel like you have to listen to the whole episode. Anyway, if you don't know me, my name's Michelle, and I am the CEO/founder of this company. My pronouns are she, they, and without further ado, we will have the first person introduce themselves and say a fun fact about themselves.
Hello, my name is Marco, he, him, and I beatbox all the time. Unless I'm talking to people.
How did I not know that?
This is a
Probably
pretty
because
good
we've
fact. So I'm Matthew, and my pronouns are he, him, and I'm getting 2 more tattoos in December.
Ooh.
Nice.
Thiemo?
I thought there was someone else. My bad. So I'm Thiemo, he, him pronouns, and fun fact-ish, I guess, as it's semi-related to the topic today. I think in the last year and a half, I've had conversations with about 8 people in real life.
Ah, fair.
So I've been pretty isolated.
That is fair.
Don't know if that's fun or not, but there we go.
It's a fact. So I just want to give you guys a reminder before we dive into this episode that if you are not comfortable answering a question, do feel free to pass. Again, it's a heavy topic, and you are not obligated to share literally anything. So if you want to bypass some questions, feel free to. With that being said, though, we will start with the first question, which is, what's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you think of mental health?
I suppose, like, depression, self-esteem, yeah.
Yeah?
So I'm
Not
gonna
really
I'm gonna
phrases, but
I'm gonna go the opposite direction here and say motivation. I think motivation is everything when it comes to mental health. If you have the motivation to, let's say, change it, so I'd say motivation.
That's interesting.
I was thinking of this earlier, and I was thinking more phrase than word, and I thought the kind of classic misconception of men don't cry. That was what got me there, because obviously you have a lot of that traditionally, and it's kind of opening up a bit more now, and you've kind of got that on here on this podcast episode as well. So you kind of with more, it's more acceptable, I guess, in society for men to be encouraged and speak out about it, which it's good that that's kind of reversing on itself there, because again, mental health.
yeah, like I would say, sort of future focused. Understanding is kind of the way things are pushing.
I like that. The first word that comes to me is awareness, because that's literally all I do. Half my social media is just me preaching about a bunch of things, and most of the time it is mental health. And this episode just so happens to fall into my spreading awareness type of thing. Thank you for that. we'll do the second question, which is, what was the first time you had to actively think of mental health?
Are we like first time someone had a conversation or asked a question that made you think about it, or more like regarding self?
It could be anything. Totally how you interpret the question. Anytime that you thought to yourself, I am actively thinking of mental health now, and I have not before.
I mean, the first time there were conversations, it was like probably presentations in high school or something, etc. But we didn't really, I don't think in high school we really touched on it a ton. If we did, it wasn't super memorable, or it didn't resonate with me. But I would say, I think there was definitely sort of something just subsurface for a while that COVID really highlighted. Working from home for school was quite difficult. It wasn't until fairly recently that I've managed to get a handle on things.
I'm gonna go last if that's okay, because mine's quite the story that's gonna touch upon most of the topics we have tonight. So
Yeah,
if
that's totally fine.
I'll
Fair
wait.
enough.
I was thinking, because again, I'm quite a logical person, and I was trying to think the earliest. I was taking the question quite literally. What was the first time to quite earliest memory? And I think it's similar to Marco there in terms of school, but it was kind of, I think, around primary school, but again, just touched on briefly in history when talking about the First World War with the soldiers having PTSD, and that's just kind of, I think back then, maybe, I'm not sure how much of a presence mental health had in society, not as much as it does now, of course, but it was kind of opening up to that, and it was this kind of thing that was being touched upon, and the teachers maybe didn't necessarily fully understand everything to do with it, or how to approach that kind of topic with kids. But again, after that, it was kind of, again, secondary school, you kind of have it in those kind of those classes where they're meant to kind of prepare you for life, and mental health kind of comes into that a bit, but again, it's not touched upon a great deal, and you have to figure it out with your friends or by yourself a bit about what it means. And again, you see it maybe in films or TV shows more, which if you spend a lot of your time watching that, I think that was maybe, I do a lot of that. That's where it came across me, and then you actively think about that because you are observing these characters for half an hour, 40 minutes, or 2-hour film or whatever. So you start thinking about it there, and then you realise that, and maybe it's just me, but you then start thinking, oh yeah, maybe I should be thinking about that myself, and maybe that would explain a few things here or there that I'm thinking, and it kind of grows from there. But I think until you have some kind of difficulty maybe in your life, you don't think about it as much, because when everything's going good, you don't really question it, I guess.
Yeah.
So that would be my long answer for that.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I definitely I get it from the point of, when you're learning about soldiers that have PTSD. I have one of my cousin's families is in the US, and I grew up just knowing that I had to be careful of the way that I spoke or things that I did around one of my cousins because he was a soldier. And he had like major PTSD, but also, unfortunately, growing up in an Asian household, nobody knows anything about mental health, especially since they were not born in the Western world. Everyone had come over and they knew nothing. So they were just like, oh, this guy has issues. Don't do this around him. And it kind of sucked, but that was the first time that I ever had to think about mental health. And then once learning what actual PTSD was, I became more aware and more educated, and it was different from just like someone being like, don't, tap your spoon on the table around your cousin. Like it had to be more than that. But that was the first time that I ever questioned myself, when I started interacting with him more. I started questioning myself and being like, do I also struggle with my mental health, or is it just like certain people that have been through things?
I'd say I'd follow up on that very quickly and just say, yeah, that is the kind of thing I was trying to get at, maybe, that I didn't realize until you said it. It was this notion of you are told what not to do around certain people, but you're not really told why. You're told it affects them in some way, but you don't fully understand, and you think that the people telling you that probably don't understand fully either. You're just told to be careful around them, when maybe you should be trying to not necessarily just be blunt with them and say, oh, why is this an issue for you, but maybe try and broach it in some way. But it was just easier and safer at that point, from a certain point of view, to just try and avoid doing anything that would trigger them. And whereas these days, kind of more open, so we're allowed in quotation marks to talk about it and encourage people to do it. But before then, it was still kind of unknown territory for a lot of people.
Well, Michelle brings up another good point, as in sometimes, obviously if you have PTSD for whatever reason, mental health isn't just about that. It's about the average Joe that maybe hasn't been through rougher experiences than others. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And one of the things that I've sort of seen more recently is how sometimes, even if you have a fairly good start, or you haven't necessarily been through something particularly traumatic, sometimes something fairly innocuous can just cling in a weird way, like something that your parents said like offhand that was in no way like meant to be significant, that you can just kind of cling for some reason, and cause issues later down the line. I definitely think it's one of those things that probably part of maturity slash like loss of innocence. It's very much a hindsight thing. Like I can use hindsight and sort of look at back in high school and be like, okay, yeah, I can sort of see where some of this stuff, there was evidence back then for some things. But I think in general, it definitely seemed like this kind of elephant in the room that I suppose is one of those topics that you kind of recognized other people in the room know a lot more about it than you do. And like, in some cases, they're not telling you something, particularly if it's like, can't quite think of an example, but you could definitely have a situation where a teacher or a parent or something, or someone is, there's something has happened, and kids are smart. They'll pick up that, okay, something has happened. The mood has changed, but nobody's saying anything. No one's explaining anything. But
I think I'm ready to share my long speech now. So again, this kind of ties into a lot of things, Michelle. Like you, it's definitely not Asian culture. I grew up in a hillbilly / redneck culture where life is pretty simple. You just go to work, and then that's it, really. So I never learned about mental health. I'm going to be the first one to say that I was very ignorant when it came to it. People would say like, "Oh, I can't go out tonight. I'm having like an anxiety attack or a panic attack," and I'm like, "Just get the fuck over it." But again, I was just very ignorant to it until it happened to me, and this is one of the stories that I shared when we were talking about drugs and alcohol that episode. But when I was 22 or 21 or something like that, I used to take edibles to help me fall asleep. But there was one night where I took too many, and I just had this really bad panic attack. And I thought, okay, I'm just way too high. When I go to bed, like, I'll wake up and I'll be fine. But it just rolled this panic attack that like lasted 5 days, and I had no idea what it was. So, you know, my dad came over and I was just randomly crying, and he's like, "What's wrong?" And I genuinely thought that I was going crazy. So I think
Mhm.
that's when I, after that, I actively thought of mental health and discovering what it was and realizing that it's actually something bigger that I was just very ignorant to.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that would be my first time was that time.
That's fair. I do want to touch back on like the reason why I say like Asian household is because I understand that like again like all over the world like there needs to be so much more awareness and compassion for mental health, but I do feel like typically, at least in my experience, um the majority of people that I've met that have said like I'm going through something with my mental health and I talked to my parents about it and their parents eventually either like from the start supported them or eventually came around or didn't understand but offered to help them find therapy or something along those lines were predominantly like white people. And um also like the difference in like country, like cityscapes and school like educational institutions, like there are signs in North American schools that are like, hey, if you're struggling, like this is the hotline to call, or like there's an office that you can go to get a pamphlet. And it's not enough, it definitely is nowhere near enough, but
Sure, I didn't mean to like say anything like that. Like I was just saying that like I understand where you were coming from, because like specifically my father's side of the family knows nothing of that. Like it's just something that's not mentioned or talked about. It's just
yeah,
kind of
no,
like
that's
you
totally
get through it.
fair.
Yeah.
I always tend to like have to like not because of you or anything that you said, but I have to like emphasize to like whenever I'm talking about my issues, like it definitely is my experience, and I'm not trying to like invalidate what you're saying about like your family, because just because they're not like on the other side, right? Like just because they're not Asian doesn't mean that they are 100% on board and ready to talk to you about your mental health, right? Um, it's just like my bias is that a lot more Asian families are less encouraging about it, I guess, educated about it. And the refusal to get educated, I think, is a lot higher in non-Western parts of the world. But yeah, that's what I did. All right. With this topic, it leads into the next question, which is what was your first experience in being educated on mental health? And I did make a note that this can be general or specific. Like, did you get educated on one specific part of mental health at one point in your life because you're very interested in it? Did you have like a general, like, one day or experience that made you more educated about it and want to be more educated, just like along those lines?
Um, hmm. I think part of why it's kind of hard for me to pin down sort of like when I started becoming aware of it is because it's been a slow progression of people slowly talking about it more. And similar to like some particular friends that I have, like we just kind of slowly started talking more. And so it's like actually don't really know when we became friends for sort of a similar reason. But I think one of the earlier and more memorable points where like I know that we talked about it in high school, but I think one of the most memorable things is a while back, Jaden Animations. I don't know if anyone else has heard of them, but
Yeah, she does like Pokemon videos and shit, right?
yeah,
Like all different like games. Yeah.
But several years back, she posted a video that was very raw, and just very open and transparent about what she was struggling with, and that really resonated with me. Not necessarily because I saw myself in that situation. I mean, I guess it's more of an empathy thing. She just did a very good job of visualizing and communicating what it's like. And I think that was definitely sort of an anchor point. Definitely something that I remember, because it was a very powerful video. But yeah, I know there was more before it, but it was just kind of sort of slow and steady, just sort of slowly talking about it more. Whereas I think her video was a little bit more of a pointed and intense.
Very blunt and open.
Yeah. So it sticks out a bit more, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I did just remember that, I have known of a few people who've committed suicide, so I actually completely forgot about that. There's one guy that I met him once. I didn't really know him very well. He was a friend of a friend. And, I met him once through that friend, and then not too long after, we had added each other on Steam, and he's still on my Steam friends list. And I don't think he hasn't been online in like 4,000 days or something like that, and didn't know him really, but he's gonna stay in the friends list.
Yeah. Matthew?
Sorry, what was the question? I was just listening.
No worries.
Sorry.
It's all good.
No,
What was the first
no
experience
problem.
of being educated in mental? Okay, yeah. So, to be honest, after my experience that I just discussed earlier, probably in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was anything the therapist really said. I think it was me saying it out loud and finding self-awareness in it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of educated myself in my own mental health. By just kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of breaking down the points and then kind of putting it all together. So I'd say my first experience was through therapy.
Nice.
I would say similar to what Matthew just said there in terms of self-educating. Like I said before, with the first time you actually actively think of it, there was like the odd class or something in secondary school. But again, there was never really anything on that as far as I can remember. And if it was, it wasn't good enough to be committed to memory. So that probably tells you everything you need to know on that. But when I first got to university, then it was brand new setting and everything, brand new people, kind of fresh starters, as good as one as you're going to get anyway. And just happened to make friends with a couple of people who had been at the uni a couple of years already, I think, at that point, and they were doing psychology. And got on with them really well, and it was just kind of, these conversations just kind of came naturally, talking about topics related to mental health. You've got depression, you've got anxiety, these kind of things. And I think part of me was always just curious and didn't really have that outlet before. Or if it was there, it wasn't an obvious one. Whereas these people were studying it as part of the course, and they were more than happy to talk about it because it's their passion to talk about everything to do with that, and they're fascinated by it. And then I can feel like it's not like a free therapy session as such, but it's kind of this safe setting where you can just explore your thoughts that aren't fully formed, and you can say something kind of wrong if you know what I mean. If to try and express what your question is, and from there we kind of built up a bit, and then obviously with more people that you get to know over time over the last few years, ever since university, to be honest, you obviously meet people who have struggled with depression or anxiety or something completely different, or have suicidal thoughts. And the first time you come across that, I don't know about the rest of you, but you kind of have an oh shit moment because you have no training and you have no idea what to do with this. But you kind of, again, you just try and do your best in terms of being nice to them and helping them through in whatever way you can, even if it's just listening. So there's you're not likely to have the magical solution because there isn't one. But you just kind of educate yourself through experience there. So, and I think having that outlet with the friends that I was saying about and being able to explore it a bit was the first kind of education as such, and helped me feel a bit more grounded and prepared for stuff later on. And I definitely wouldn't be as not open, but it's kind of I can understand or try, and I've got more patience now because I know roughly kind of things I'm dealing with. I'm not going to understand everything, but you kind of you know when to say something, you know when to shut up and just listen, and sometimes that's enough. And once you're past that, you can then maybe find someone else who that person is more comfortable talking to, or there's another person who would just be better qualified on every front on that one. And then also with recognizing any mental health issues that you're having yourself, because you get to talk it out with someone else, and then suddenly something clicks and maybe that's what that was a few years ago, or maybe that explains what I'm feeling now. So I think it's always an education process, but I think there just wasn't really anything in school, and it's a shame I had to wait until to university to kind of realize this side of things. So
I feel that. I definitely get it because in high school, one of my teachers started a mental health club, and it was to raise awareness. We gave out, green ribbons and baked, and we had a bake sale, and the funds went to like a donation, but they weren't trained, on anything. So it started with this very like showy, hey, we're here and we don't know what we're doing, but we're here for you kind of thing. And
to be fair, cake makes you feel better.
Okay, so because I think at our age, I don't know what everybody else's age is here. I'm 24. I think at our age, sure, there was little things in high school that kind of like talked about mental health, but you saying that there was a club, was there like a bad stigma around it? Like
definitely. My school was very interesting, to say the least. A lot of people would avoid things that we did. One of my friends that I asked to join the club was actually like, I don't know if I should do that because people think it's a little ridiculous. And I was like, well, I'm going to do it. If you want to, do it. Long story short, for that club, it died after like 2 years, unfortunately. But when I got to university, after going through some stuff, I told a friend, Mikan, who's actually on these podcasts episodes, I told her that I wanted to start a mental health club and make it a safe space and somewhere that I can actually be in charge, because I know that I want to do more than just a bake sale and then quit when people make fun of you. And thank God for her, because if it wasn't for her, I definitely would not have gone through with it. But I started it at U Ottawa. Shout out to Students for Mental Health Awareness. It's still there. Like, I left that school a while ago. It's been 4 years running now, and they, like, the people in charge now, the amazing team, sold merch and donated $1,000 to a mental health organization. Like, they have done amazing things with it. And definitely my time of actually educating myself came with that club, because I thought, now that I'm starting this, now that I'm actually in charge and I want to leave something here with good people, I kind of have to be educated about what I'm talking about, you know? Because obviously I want to bring in like professionals and other speakers and all that. But if we're doing like a peer-to-peer event or something like that, like, I have to be able to actually talk about things and know what I'm talking about so I can help people. So yeah. TLDR, high school sucked and university was a little better. So
That's so motivational. High school university is a bit better.
That's just a good summation of the education system, no?
Hey, and actually also Thiemo was in one of the photos for our mental health club at U Ottawa.
I'm gonna
I
have
was
to
like,
see that photo. I can't remember that.
it was really random. If I can find it, I'll send it after. But it was really funny. I just thought it was really funny. Anyway. Okay. This is the kind of big sad question. If you want to pass it, feel free to. But it is, what has been your toughest struggle with mental health? What helped you through it? And are you still struggling with it to this day?
I can break the ice if anyone wants me to go first.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I don't know if it's the toughest one because it's still kind of happening at the moment, but it's kind of a recent thing because I think for me, just traditionally, I've always been kind of very practical person. So whilst I may have had some issues, we all have mental health issues at some point, you know. It's kind of thing where I try not to let these things get me down too long. Because going back to what we were saying earlier, first word that comes to your mind when you think of mental health, motivation. I've been determined for quite a while to make sure that I'm on top of that kind of thing. So when something comes from left field out of nowhere, it really annoys me and kind of it throws me for six, which is what happened recently. Which was, I was meant to move countries, and I did. And I mean, I'm shortening it down because otherwise this podcast will be about 6 hours long. But there was just, so it was a new country which I'd been to a few times before, and knew what I was expecting. It's not the first time I'd done this kind of thing, so I wasn't expecting to have any issues, and it was kind of the only scenario where I hadn't really considered it going sideways in this way. And I just remember being there, and the place was lovely. Like as a place to visit, I'd fully recommend. But living there, there was just this feeling of being completely overwhelmed and anxiety that I had never really had before, and it just kind of, as I said, it was completely overwhelming. And I thought maybe it was just because new place, you are not going to get used to it straight away, and you'll get used to it, and you need to have a sleep, have some food, all these kind of things. You try and think of logical things to do to try and get yourself a bit sorted. But sure enough, I got around to having a decent nap after a while when I was able to, and woke up even worse. And anxiety levels I've never seen before, and I was a complete mess. And knew I just would not be able to stick it out there. And it's one of those things where, which again, it depends where you are with whatever you're fighting against on the mental health front, but trusting your gut instinct on things is very important, I think. Because for me, with this situation, I knew that I had to listen to it, and there was no point ignoring it because it would just make the situation worse. Which for someone like me, who I can be a bit stubborn with things and I like to see things through, was quite something to accept, I think. So it's something now that I still don't know exactly why I was feeling the way I did, or having this anxiety for the week or so that I was there. But it was just constant, and because again, I don't usually do this kind of thing because I can find a logical answer to a logical problem, and it's again having this, and mental health just isn't logical sometimes, is it? So I think it was just trying to deal with that, and what helping me through it was just not putting pressure on myself when I came back from there to sort it out, because if you, and again maybe just me, I realise I generalise there, but if you force yourself to think about these things and like, okay, it's Monday today, I'm going to force myself to figure this all out by Friday, otherwise I'm going to be really annoyed with myself. That doesn't work. You need to be doing other things, I think, to let your mind deal with it in your subconscious a bit. And then when you're ready to talk to someone about it, and that's exactly what I did. I just did like lots of little things around the house to try and keep myself busy, and then talk to a few people about it, and then just take it a little bit at a time. And that's what's helped me with that. But again, it's something that hasn't completely gone away. So in some ways, it is one of the toughest struggles so far, because again, it's just something that on a personal level is just very out of character for me, and you want to be able to figure that out. So I feel like I'm going to ramble slightly now, so I will hand it over to someone else.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think one of the tricky things with mental health is like physical or external problems can be illustrated or perhaps understood more easily in some ways, or more literally anyway. But I think the thing with mental health and why it can be very confusing and can be very difficult is because like your compass is shifting, right? It's not just like, let's say you're trying to build something with wood. Well, if it falls apart and you don't have enough duct tape to put it back together, well, you know what the problem is. But with mental health, it's like your magnetic north is shifting, or you've lost sight of it. And like it's a shroud, right? In a lot of ways. And you can lose orientation. And that's, I think, why in a lot of, I think that's why it's so important to talk about it. Because, some people might not realize that their compass is starting to drift. And, maybe they're just watching YouTube or something, and then someone mentions it and it resonates, and, they can address it before it becomes a bigger problem. But like for me, it was sort of a slow and longer thing that a lot of it really surrounds ADHD, and just not necessarily specifically the inability to focus, because it's a lot more than that, because ADHD sort of touches everything. But where do I start? I think one of the things that has been sort of a theme through high school and through university has been sort of a struggle with school, and of course procrastination. But I know that especially more recently with university, I was starting to get kind of fed up with it, and wasn't enjoying it. But that had more to do with how I was approaching assignments, and it had more to do with the procrastination, because I would not start something, or I'd be like, oh, okay, I just finished this assignment, so I have some time. And I would overestimate how much time I had, or I would sort of drag my feet to getting things started. But then it would always sort of end up in this last minute rush to try to get things done. And with COVID and then stuff shifting online, I realize I'm a much more social person than I initially realized. More of an ambivert than introvert. But the whole thing was sort of bracketed by expectations. And that's really the big thing. And the breakthrough recently was Healthy Gamer. And I took a look at the coaching. So I've been doing the group coaching for, we're about halfway through, so 8-9 weeks. We just kind of like this, except it's not recorded. But, you just kind of talk and check in multiple perspectives. And someone sort of was listening to some of the stuff that I was talking about and mentioned ego. And it's interesting because ego, it's not only like arrogance. That's sort of the first thought, but it's the part of your mind that makes comparisons. And so when it goes both ways. With ego, you can think you're superior or inferior. And it also connects to expectations. So like if you ask someone out and you get rejected, and you say, oh, well, I didn't like them anyway. Well, that's not true. You asked them out. You wouldn't have done that if you didn't like them. But that little sort of knee-jerk, oh, I didn't actually like them, that's ego kind of coming in to try to protect you from that negative feeling of rejection. And it's the sort of I thought when you're thinking of yourself, but it's not. It's the same mechanism that you use to make judgments of other people. So when you hear someone else say, oh, don't worry, I'll be there, and then, they're kind of always late, you make a certain judgment about that person. But that can also backfire, right? Because you'll be like, oh, okay, I'll do it tomorrow. And then you don't do it tomorrow. And then, okay, well, I'll do it Friday. And then it doesn't happen Friday. And you end up that same mechanism ends up judging you. And then you look at yourself and you're like, oh, well, these are my values and I'm not living by them. And that can be a very painful thing, especially when those values are something instilled by your parents, like go to university kind of thing. And especially if you're a smart kid, people telling you you've got so much potential, which I think is a somewhat common thing with ADHD. Managing expectations. And once they pointed out ego, I did a bit of reading in that. It made a very big sudden change, which is not always the case for a lot of people. It's a very slow, long journey. So I consider myself lucky that I was able to make sort of a rapid change. Hopefully that wasn't too long-winded.
just to add on there a little bit, you can be your own worst enemy at times. As much as you want to change it, you then get too overwhelmed or whatever with thinking about trying to force that change and then feeling bad when it doesn't happen overnight. And you just need to try and accept that it's a gradual process, like you say. Like sometimes it can be a quick change from negative to positive, but you also need to know that, especially if it's something you weren't necessarily aware of before, and you look back and see it's been this gradual thing, like you say, that, okay, well, it's taken a while for me to get here. It's going to take a while to get back. It's like anything. You're not going to be miraculously fixed or an expert at something overnight. So it's but again, just allowing yourself to give yourself the breaks when you need it, because you can't force it, and you don't want to then spiral and make yourself feel worse when you're trying to actively be better about everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the sudden change was possible because I did a whole bunch of stuff before that for an extended period of time. So I had a bit of a foundation to move a little bit more quickly, perhaps. But yeah.
Yeah. Matthew?
First and foremost, Marco, I want to be your friend, man. I could just listen to you talk all day. Like, seriously, everything that you've said, I've either thought about and couldn't put into words, or everything. You just fucking touched on everything that I could possibly say about it. I think we have a lot of similarities. Specifically, I think there's 3 toughest struggles for me when it comes to mental health. One being that, well, the story I said earlier about the edibles and stuff like that. That was a fucking nightmare week. I hated everything about that. But I think my earliest struggles were definitely to do with my ADHD. It was always this power struggle of, if I don't take these pills, then I won't do good work. If I don't do good work, then everybody's going to judge me on that. And I'm going to procrastinate at school, and I'm not going to do good at school. But the other flip coin of that was, if I take these pills, I have extreme bad anxiety. I feel like everybody's watching me, and I feel like a different person. So it was always such a struggle when it came to mental health and ADHD. They go very hand in hand.
Yeah.
So that's something I think that was tough to struggle with. Also, I think, as lame as this sounds for mental health, I have a very, I've recently discovered I have a very unhealthy relationship with video games. Not that I play them too often, but I used to really play at a competitive level where, I was going to tournaments to make money and stuff like that. And now, even if I play Among Us, if I'm not winning those games, I'm raging. So it's I think those 3 are definitely something that I struggle balancing. But Marco, when you were talking about this shroud, I completely agree. When I was having panic attacks and anxiety over those edibles, that's the perfect word from it, was this shroud of despair and loss of hope. In my opinion, that's what I felt like. As soon as I started having the panic attacks, everything in my mind was just worst scenario. My breathing was heavy, and I was thinking, my girlfriend's gonna find out, she's gonna dump me. I'm never gonna be able to travel again because I'm too freaked out. And all these bad thoughts go in your head that just it seems hopeless.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that. I earlier I had mentioned hindsight, and that's, I can think to high school of when, there were particular moments where I'm like, okay, yeah, no, this seems kind of like this. But for me, looking back to when I was part way through last year, sort of in the middle of 2020, or 2021, that year, it was. There was a particular chunk of time where I wasn't in my room. I was in, because my parents were renovating that room. I was in the dining room, which had darker paint, and because it's on the ground floor, the curtains closed, and it's incredible how much of a difference light, and especially natural light, makes on your mood. And on top of that, school was really rough. And when I look at that moment in hindsight, there was definitely a lot of that sort of loss of hope in certain areas, and just wanting to quit, really. But looking back, it's at the time, sort of in the moment, you don't quite, it's one of those things that's hard to quantify. But looking back, I can guarantee that it's yeah, I was not in a good spot. And I'm in a much better spot now. But it's not like you're like, oh, you know, I've moved 5 meters. You can't really quantify it. But yeah, I think ego in particular is a big thing with ADHD, because ego deals with comparison. And with ADHD, you learn from a fairly young age that you're different. And
Yeah.
that can be sometimes a really hard thing to deal with. Now, I wasn't medicated from a young age. I started medication recently. And I think it's one of those things that's actually partially beneficial to do a little bit later, because you can communicate a bit better. You can understand how the medication is affecting you a bit better. Expecting a child to understand the nuances of how a medication is affecting them might be a bit of a tall order, because a lot of the stories that I've heard about medication having terrible side effects, and like when I was trying medication, like some of it wasn't great, but like my experience.
Just so we're on the same track, I'm like very against any type of medication like that.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Yeah, like my experience, especially recently, has been, it's definitely helped me. But you know, there was one particular brand that I tried, I think Concerta, that made me angry, and you know,
yeah, that was
I had the self-awareness and to notice that, and my mom also noticed it. But that's why I'm glad that I went through that as an adult, and that my parents didn't medicate me when I was younger, because you get a better before and after, I suppose, and you can understand what it's doing a bit better, and you're like, okay, yeah, no, not trying this one, let's try a different one. But yeah.
I think one thing to just add on there was just a thought I was having as you were saying that, and in no way, like, I don't mean anything bad by this, but it just kind of the thing that you have as well, I think of, you can't help but compare yourself in some ways, I feel like, to other people who go through mental health issues, and you think, oh, if someone has to have, or is going to have, therapy, or they need some medication or anything like this, you then, and you yourself don't have it, or haven't got to that point yet, you think, oh, maybe my issues are not as relevant or as important as this person, because this person, you think, oh, it's a much more serious thing, where it's you can't really compare. It's you just can't.
Right.
But it's another way of you getting your own head about these things, and it kind of makes the problem worse in some ways, because then you think, oh, if my problem's not as bad as what this person's going through, I don't need to talk anything out. I just need to talk a bit. Yeah. So it's trying to make sure that everyone who has these issues of whatever kind don't feel like it's a competition, or there's tiers to how bad it is. It's all bad in some way, but it's all manageable, and it's just finding what best works for the individual, and sorting out that way. But again, it's so easy to say, of course, but a lot, and I feel like a lot of solutions that are proposed for how to deal with mental health are all really simple, but they're just not really simple in practice, if that makes sense. It's like, oh, just try and do little things and you'll feel positive about it. But when you're feeling like shit, you are not thinking about these kind of things, or you are not trying to focus on these sorts of things, and you just want to forget about everything. And it's again just finding that balance, and what works for one person may not work for another, and you can't compare it. And it's just making sure that everyone is comfortable. And then that again is why I think the education side of it is really important, and why it's important to talk about it with people you're comfortable with, or at least try to talk about it, because then you can, even if you're not 100% sure of what you're going through, it's a good way to try and find out and express yourself. But if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of advice out there. I think the tricky thing is the right advice at the right time.
Mm-hmm. We are.
Yeah, we took over the shit.
No worries. I honestly, like, when I was writing out the outline for this, I was like, especially with the topic like this, it gets very personal, and there's honestly not enough time in the world to talk about it, because like each person has their own personal experience and all that, right? I would love to do a part 2 to this episode, but for now we are running a little low on time. So I think I'm going to put together 2 questions, kind of. We're going to kind of chop it down, and the last question before we go for everyone will be, can you give an example of a healthy coping mechanism that you have, and what would you like to say to someone that is struggling with their mental health?
I think the first thing I'll say to anyone who's struggling or think they might be struggling, don't be afraid to talk, and you're not alone. It's like that analogy that teachers give, ask questions, because there's probably 1,000 other people that have them, the same question. And I think that's also true for mental health. I think talking to people you trust is a good coping mechanism. But aside from something very general like that, coping sort of depends on your individual scenario. Yeah.
So my 2 are a bit different. They're very specific, and very odd. But one is to simply make your bed in the morning. You achieved one goal for the day, and to keep on achieving those goals. That's the first step. And also to take short showers. Overthinking in showers is so fucking deadly. I think for me, and I think for other people that I've talked to, like, showers are the perfect place to overthink. So just keep your showers short. Do what you have to do and just get out.
Yeah. I mean, fair. Like, I overthink in the shower all the time.
Yeah.
I just pace my room.
I'm showering wrong from the way you 2 are talking. I feel like I'm not thinking enough inside there. Well, I would say the same thing for coping mechanism and for what I would say to someone, which would be appreciate the little things or the small wins, because like the making the bed in the morning, it's something so small but so simple, and you get a stupid amount of satisfaction from that, I think. And even if it's just going outside and sitting outside for 5-10 minutes or something, or just going on a small walk, or you needed to clean the dishes, or and it's just little household jobs, or you were meant to check one thing on again, like you wanted to check social media for something. You did something, and it's made you. It's got you out of thinking about yourself. It's got you out of your own head, rather, for a couple of minutes. And I think once you have those little things and you can really appreciate them a bit, then it really helps your mindset a bit, because and especially if it's early in the morning, which is not always the case for people, because you might be staying up late overthinking about things, and then you sleep until 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you're feeling bad about having your day wasted. But I think it's, again, just knowing that there's 24 hours in a day. There's no set schedule for any of that, especially these days. So again, just take things at your own pace and appreciate the little things, I think. And don't worry too much.
Yeah. I think the coping mechanism that I tell people the most is try and separate yourself from yourself. treat yourself like you would your best friend, because personally, I have all the love and respect for my best friend in the world. Like, I would never let anything bad happen to her. I would never let her say anything bad about herself. Anytime she's told me about an insecurity, I've said, while your feelings are valid and, it's on you to, work with yourself and support yourself. At the same time, I'm here to tell you that, like, your insecurities are beautiful to me, and your imperfections are what make you you, and there's nothing about you that I would change. So I try to, tell myself that same thing, even though it's hard, because when you're looking at yourself, it's so much easier to point out the bad than the good. The second thing that I tell people is just paint. It sounds so simple, and it really is, because if you are good at painting, you're going to enjoy painting because you know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing because you don't have an artistic bone in your body, get some dollar store paint, fucking go outside and splash that shit everywhere. It is so therapeutic. It doesn't have to look like anything. Just fucking, like, model it after those $10 million modern art paintings that are literally just someone was angry and threw red paint at a canvas. Like, either way, it helps. Otherwise, if you guys would like to plug any social medias, say them now, and I will add them to the description. Go ahead.
I don't have any socials for myself that are notable, but I have found Healthy Gamer, GG, and Better Ideas on YouTube. I've found them helpful as resources.
Nice.
I'm just gonna plug my Snapchat, which is bad.
I'm gonna say.
Otherwise, thank you so much, guys, for being a part of this episode. I always love having multiple people, just so that we have like a full-on conversation going. This is the first episode, I think, actually, that like the guests have talked a lot more than I did, and I really appreciate that, because finally I get to listen. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. And to anyone that is listening, of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm working on the Spotify. Follow the Instagram, follow my photography Instagram. Keep up to date with socials. And very soon, the Discord server that we're actually recording in will be more open to small business owners and entrepreneurs. So if you want to be a part of it, just message the Instagram and we'll get it super set up. And yeah, big things are coming. Thank you for listening, and we'll end it here.